Morning everyone. Before we start the meeting, can I ask everyone to ensure that your microphones are switched off and your phones are on silent or switched off, and possibly in future I would be asking members of the committee if you feel able to come closer in the future. We used to always sit in the front 2 rows. COVID spread us out. Anyway, welcome. I'm Councillor George Richardson and I'll be chairing today's meeting. The meeting is being broadcast through YouTube, and if we get a thumbs up, we're good to go. We have a number of officers with us this morning who I'll now ask to introduce themselves, starting with Kirsty Charlton on my right.
Kirsty Charlton, Committee Services Officer.
Neil Carter, I'm the solicitor to the committee.
Stephen Reid, I'm the planning manager.
Louisa Olivier, Senior Planning Officer.
And Graham Blakey, Principal Planning Officer.
Thank you. Do we have any apologies for absence? Says we seem to be all here, so that's good. So no substitute members. Any declarations of interest? Yes, Carl.
Thanks, Chair. Just on both the agenda items, both the applicants are known to me through my previous role as the Cabinet Lead.
Thank you. The minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd of May 2023, can we agree those minutes? Thank you. We'll move on to the applications to be determined. The first application is 5A land to the north of George Pitt Lane, Great Lumley. I'll ask Louisa to present, please.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. So the first slide here shows the site boundary outlined in red. As you can see, it is on the southeastern edge of the settlement of Great Lumley, over 2 fields with housing to 2 sides. And we've got Lumley Waterworks to the north and open pasture to the east. To the south is a tree belt and some private allotments, and the green dotted lines show the public rights-of-way in the vicinity, with one running centrally through the site and one adjacent to the southern boundary. The facilities and services of the village are along Front Street to the west of the school, and that's in the region of about 900 metres to 1 kilometre distant. So this is the aerial photograph of the site. It shows that the site is mainly 2 arable fields divided by the right-of-way, although there is now a further section of another field to the east that has now also been included to include more space for a new tree belt. You can see the linear and squarish nature of the settlement from this photograph. So the first photograph here is taken from the public right-of-way that runs along the south of the site, looking back towards the village and the properties of Stainmore Drive. And the photo on the right is taken from Cocken Lane, looking east towards the open countryside. You will note that the site itself is relatively flat and open countryside, with no buildings or structures. However, there are trees and hedgerows on the boundaries. This photograph on the left is taken from Cocken Lane, looking back towards the settlement edge. You can see it is similar on both sides of the road, and the edge here is formed by fencing, which does present quite a harsh edge surrounded by open countryside. The stretch of roadside hedgerow on the right-hand side of the road would need to be removed to allow wider footpaths and for visibility for the access. The photo on the right-hand side shows the settlement edge on the east, which is slightly softer with some vegetation and somewhat screened by roadside trees. There would be some minor hedge and tree removal for access and footpath purposes at this part of the site also. and this last photograph shows the views of the site from the footpath that runs through the site. The views to the east, which is the left-hand side of the picture, would be prevented by much of the route by built development and curtilage fencing. So this is the proposed layout for the site. As you can see, it's an inverted L-shaped site with a single road served by two accesses to the west and to the north. The proposal includes 3 character areas and an additional planting buffer on the east of the original site boundary. 15% of the dwellings will be secured as affordable housing through a mix of rental and ownership. There's an area of open space proposed to the southeast corner of the site, and that's also the location for the suds basin and a pumping station. A play area, which is a trim trail, is proposed in the western section of the site. Landscaping is proposed throughout the site in the form of hedgerow and tree planting, structure planting, and the creation of wildflower and wetland habitat. The application details that the proposal will necessitate the removal of 5 trees, 3 entire groups of trees, and 3 sections of hedgerows to facilitate the new footways, access works, bus stops, and for junction visibility. These works are fully detailed in the report. So we've got some typical elevations here in the 3 different character areas. On the key frontages along Front Street and Cocken Lane, which is the one at the top there would be red brick dwellings with weatherboard cladding. In the areas adjacent to current housing, there would be red brick dwellings with grey roof tiles, and that's the middle section there. And in the areas that look out to the wider landscape and open space, there would be red brick and cream render with grey roof tiles. There would be a mix of 2, 3, 4 and 5 bed dwellings, which includes 15 bungalows. All dwellings would be compliant with NDSS, and 66% would be MS42 compliant, which is concerned with accessibility. So turning to consultee responses, in respect of statutory consultees, Northumbrian Water, the lead local flood authority, the coal authority and the highways officer have requested conditions. National Highways have no objection. The Health and Safety Executive advised against approval due to the proximity of historical records of potentially hazardous materials at Lumley Treatment Works. In terms of internal consultees, Archaeology, Environmental Health, Air Quality, Contaminated Land and Pollution Control, Sustainable Travel and the Monitoring Officer have all requested conditions. Design and Conservation initially raised design concerns, but these have been in the most part addressed. Housing Delivery, Police and the Public Rights of Way Officer have provided comment on the layout, and these have also now been addressed. Ecology requested Section 106 agreement for mitigation and biodiversity net gain and conditions for other aspects. Landscape officers have advised that the development is an incursion into the open countryside with resultant harm to the character and appearance of the countryside, but that this would be reduced in the longer term. It is advised that the loss of trees and hedges would only be acceptable if the benefits of the scheme outweigh the harm. They mention that the impacts to public rights of way and residential receptors are to be weighed in the planning balance, and they consider the landscaping proposed to be appropriate. The School Places Manager requests contributions for primary and secondary schools in the area. The NHS requests contributions to increase GP capacity. Spatial Policy considered the proposal conflicts with the objectives of Policy 6 and would not draw any support from Policy 10 of the County Durham Plan, and a contribution is requested for open space off-site. The Right Honourable Kevin Jones MP objects on the grounds that the Strategic Housing Land Availability Assessment deemed the site unsuitable for development, that the site is not related to Great Lumley and would not provide good access to public transport, that it has poor vehicle access and conflicts with residential amenity standards in the SPD. Great Lumley Parish Council objects in terms of sustainability. They consider the site unsuitable for development, as it has been thought that previously. They mention the HSE comments and the impacts to biodiversity. The Campaign for Protection of Rural England object, as they consider the development an intrusion into the countryside in conflict with Policy 6 of the County Durham Plan, and as the proposal performs poorly in respect of biodiversity, net gain and sustainability. So in terms of public representations, there have been 253 letters of objection, which are comprehensively detailed in the report, mainly raising the following issues. The development is not acceptable in principle, the negative impacts to landscape, character of the area and ecology, the highway safety and sustainability issues, negative impacts to infrastructure, harm to residential amenity and pollution, poor design, conflict with policy and strategy, and that there's also been late submissions from 2 residents on grounds of the age of the highway standards used by Durham County Council, the lack of detail regards bus stops, and concerns over safety of a crossing on Lumley New Road. We've also had 2 letters of support on the following grounds, and that's economic and social benefits, that concerns raised by residents are overstated, and that the issue raised have been addressed. So to conclude, the development To conclude, the development would significantly erode the open countryside setting of the settlement that currently exists and create a settlement extension with little bearing on the current relatively well-defined extent of the built-up part of the settlement in this part of Great Lumley, and it would relate poorly to the existing settlement in conflict with Policy 6 and 10 of the County Durham Plan. Despite the extensive landscaping, this does not provide adequate mitigation or compensation for the impacts on the countryside and immediate landscape setting of the site and the loss of the hedgerows and trees, contrary to Policies 10, 39 and 40 of the County Durham Plan and Part 15 of the MPPF. Due to walking distances and quality of connections, the proposal fails to provide good access by sustainable modes of transport to local services and facilities, contrary to Policy 21 of the County Durham Plan and paragraphs 105 and 110 of the MPPF. The benefits in terms of housing supply, including good quality and affordable homes and the creation of a softer edge to the settlement, would not outweigh the adverse impacts detailed above, with other impacts being neutral. In such circumstances, paragraph 12 of the MPPF advises that permission should not usually be granted unless material considerations indicate that the plan should not be followed. There are no material considerations in this particular case to indicate that the County Durham Plan should not be followed, and therefore refusal is recommended. So just before I go, we do have an important update for committee. At paragraph 165 in the report, reference is made to County Durham Plan Policy 26 and paragraphs 98, 103 and 108 of the MPPF. This is an error, and there should be no reference to Policy 26, and the MPPF paragraphs should be replaced with paragraphs 105 and 110. We would also ask, therefore, that refusal reason 4 be changed to the following wording. The application fails to demonstrate that the development would have good access by sustainable modes of transport to services and facilities in Great Lumley, contrary to criteria F of Policy 6 of the County Durham Plan, Policies 21 and 29 of the County Durham Plan, and paragraphs 105 and 110 of the MPPF. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Louisa. Very concise. Now we have 4 registered speakers for this item. There's no one from the Parish Council, but we do have the local member, Phil Heavysides, followed by Margaret Juniper and Leonard Marlowe. You two will have 2.5 minutes each. Phil, you're good to go whenever you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. I'm actually representing the Parish Council as well, because I'm currently the Chair of the Parish Council, and I thought it would be prudent to save everybody's time and only listen to the same things once instead of twice. Thank you. I'm Councillor Phil Heavysides, representing the Lumley Division, but also Great Lumley Parish Council. In the beginning, The residents were first made aware of this application. There was a social media outrage, as I should probably have expected. But unlike other bits of bad news that drag on for around 2 years, the feelings are just as strong today as they were then. This is reflected in the 253 objections posted on the portal. Even our local MP has posted an objection on the portal. To get the full picture across the early days, the planners offered to attend a public drop-in session with copies of the plans as they were then, and 3 officers attended to take questions and opinions and to give advice about the process. It was exceptionally well attended, with around 200 residents attending to make their feelings known, and just about all who attended were opposed to the plans. In discussion afterwards, I asked if the number of people attending was the normal, and I was informed that during the previous drop-in session, which was for the City of Durham application for 1,800 houses, you could count the number of people who attended on one hand. Since then, we've had regular representations at the Parish Council during the public participation sessions, asking what the parish opinion is and what the parish are going to do. The Parish Council waited until all the facts were in front of them before debating the application and deciding it should be refused in their opinion. An objection was then posted on the portal. As all members know, there are several reasons for refusal around Policy 6 and 10 of the County Durham Plan. In my opinion, Policy 6 has been quoted out of context as an excuse to land grab a greenfield site for development, and then fails to be supported in any way by Policy 10. Policy 10 being for development of open countryside. I should also point out that the site in question is currently being used for food production. Can we really afford to lose these sites and the food they produce? Chapter and verse has been very well laid out for the members in the report, but I feel there are some areas that should also be considered around this application. Other issues that will cause problems around the footpath provision on Cocken Lane and on the S-Bend in the village to the east. On the S-Bend, there isn't a path or safe crossing point with visibility in both directions. I hope this will be addressed. On Cocken Lane, the applicant assures us they will make the path wider to improve the safety for walkers to local schools and amenities. On the surface, that's great, but less than 100 metres away from the proposed entry to the site, the Stainmore Drive estate starts. The house boundaries won't allow a wider path on such a narrow road. Paragraph 168 of the report suggests that the road's actually safe, but the members came yesterday for a site visit. We were almost flattened by a 4-wheel drive, which went on to almost have a head-on collision right in front of us. Further down Cocken Lane, the school already have parking issues, with a regular line of 12 to 15 cars at the side of the road, causing a considerable stretch of single-lane traffic. This could only be made worse with all of the extra traffic and the suggested expansion of the school to accommodate an additional 45 children. While we're discussing the local schools and amenities, one part of the planning that doesn't sit comfortably with me is the S106 settlements. The developer pays the agreed amount, and then that section of the planning is signed off, job done. Well, not really. This application, the primary school has allocated 470,000 for 45 pupil places. I've recently had a job price for a similar sized building in the village that came in at over £2 million. I know Parkview, the secondary school, allocated 298,000, is already sitting on 4 such settlements and hasn't been able to make a single extra classroom place. If all 5 settlements were taken as one, it still would go nowhere near the 10 million estimate that's been worked up recently for the development of the North Lodge site to improve numbers. Added to that, they recently had an Ofsted inspection that fell down to requires improvement. So any support for the Department of Education is now blocked for the next couple of years. Because of recent large developments in Chesley Street and also in bordering areas of Sunderland, we are not far away from children in our division travelling 6 miles by bus past Parkview School, past Parkview School to North Durham Academy in Stanley, passing children from South Peelaw, Pelton Fell, Euston and Newfield travelling in the opposite direction to Parkview. A situation local members are keen to avoid, and I'm sure the budget holders from the Home to School would agree with that. Speaking of buses, we now have 2 different operators running 2 bus services through the village, 78 and 71. As mentioned in the report, it suggested that one of the services could reroute to accommodate a stop outside the development on the Front Street side, east of the village. What do you think the chances are that one of the operators will be happy to drop fares from Scorers Lane, Castledean, Lumley Thicks and Woodstone Village to service one stop in each direction to the east of the village. The report suggests bus stops to be confirmed, but with the recent changes to operator, it's made it very unlikely now, in my opinion. In conclusion, this report on the application is extensive, and in my opinion, it gives a very fair appraisal of the pros and cons of the application. Having taken local opinion into account alongside the report's conclusions, I have to fully support the officer recommendation to refuse this application and hope that the members of the committee agree that this is the right outcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. We now have two objectors, Margaret Juniper and Leonard Marlowe. You'll have 2.5 minutes each, and Kirsty will let you know when you've got 30 seconds remaining.
Right, hello, I'm Margaret Juniper, and thank you for the opportunity to address the committee. I'm here actually representing a group of about 60 households from Great Lumley who are objecting to the proposed development. We have obviously read the report and we are very happy with the outcome, and there's obviously a clear conflict in this development with policies 6 and 10 of the Durham County Plan. But we have some issues that we're concerned about specifically, and the first is the position of the development and the number and density of houses. It will be a substantial and disproportionate addition to the village and will result in about a 10% increase in the population. And that means an inevitable pressure on what are somewhat limited facilities and services in the village. And we've heard there would have to be considerable mitigation, and would it come to pass. We're also concerned about the actual location. We've heard it's an incursion into the countryside, and it would certainly change the character and rural setting of the village, and certainly negatively impact on the wider open character of the countryside. The previous development squared off the village, and this would definitely be an incursion. As residents, we know it's agricultural land, it's got footpaths and a right-of-way which are enjoyed as an amenity by the community. It's also an important habitat for wildlife. We see birds on the red and amber list, and we have the benefit of having swifts and bats forage in the fields on the insects during the summer. So definitely a place to preserve. We know that hedgerows and trees will have to be removed for this development, and although there's mitigation, we feel that there will be a net loss in terms of hedgerows and trees, and it will take many years for these to regenerate and therefore
30 seconds remaining.
Impact. We are very concerned on highway safety. Phil has mentioned many of them already, and on the S-bends on the front street, we often meet cars on the wrong side of the road because they're blind. The parking is a big problem, the transport is a big problem, and lack of the location of the site, good pedestrian access and cycling links, along with poor public transport, we feel will result in much more private car use, and we ask you to confirm with the planning officer that you will refuse this permission.
Thank you, Margaret. Well done. Leonard Marlowe, please. You'll have the same time, and Kirsty will let you know when you have 30 seconds left.
Yeah, I'd like to pick up on the whole sustainable transport side of things. So far, it's been looked at from the point of view of access and amenities in the village. However, all of these people who are going to be moving into the village are going to need to work somewhere, and there is very, very little employment in the village, unless you work in either the GP surgery or the pharmacy, which are both really struggling at the moment with capacity. We live in a rural community. That's the nature of County Durham. Unfortunately, Great Lumley is also on top of a hill and is in many respects isolated. There are 4 main roads into the village, 2 of which were inaccessible by footway. The other 2, the one up from Chesley Street, it's a narrow road. It's dangerous on a push bike. There's a 5% hill leading up from Chester Street actually into the village. It's a 70-mile-an-hour road, or 60-mile-an-hour road at that time as well. If you come up from Durham, from the Arneson Centre, which most people here actually came down that road this morning, it's a 12% hill on a narrow lane, very little passing places, and the suggestion by the developer that they're going to give everybody a £100 voucher and tell them to get a bike is, I feel, some sort of sick joke. I've met people on the new Bellway estate who've recently moved into the village who've told me quite openly when they moved into the village they sold their bike because the roads were too dangerous. If the county is serious about the whole aspect of walk, scoot, cycle, then this development does not fit into that plan. I fully support all the aspects that Margaret's picked up on the
30 seconds remaining.
And I think the planners have done a good job of highlighting all of the problems associated, and I would suggest that the plan is rejected.
Thank you, Leonard. Some different points to what Margaret had. Thank you. We now have the supporter stroke applicant, Neil Westwick. You'll have 5 minutes to address the committee, Neil.
Good morning. Just sit down, might be easier to get the mic a bit tall. Good morning, Chair and members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Neil Westwick. I'm a Senior Director at Lichfields, the agent for the applicant Bellway Homes North East. Over the course of the application, the applicant has worked proactively with the Council. We have listened to feedback from officers, consultees and the community and responded positively through amendments and iterations to the scheme. The application originally submitted to the Council included a scheme for 157 dwellings, and following the changes that have been made to the scheme before you now is for 148 dwellings. It's a high quality scheme with a varied mix. Alongside family homes, it includes 22 affordable homes and 15 bungalows, all policy compliant. The applicant has embraced the Council's design review process, which has been a positive experience, and it has genuinely helped to get the proposal to the stage where there was very little between the Council and the applicant. As you have heard from the case officer in a presentation, there are 2 outstanding red scores from the last design review panel in March 23, relating to connections and facilities and services. In summary, this relates to walking distances and quality of walking routes between the site and the nearby facilities in the settlement. The applicant has worked to address these concerns and submitted further information. Improvements to the walking routes includes enhancements to the footways adjacent to Cocken Lane and Front Street, which can be brought up to appropriate standards. The proposal will provide new bus stops to the site entrance on Front Street and a commitment to extending or diverting the bus services along this route again. This will be fully funded by the applicant. The proposals have been reviewed by consultees and we reached a point where there are no outstanding objections from your Highway Department or from your Landscape Officer. However, the scheme from you have not been back to design review panel, therefore we've not had a chance for these scores to be improved before the application is determined. As a result, in our opinion, there are a few inaccuracies in the officer's report. For instance, we do not agree with the conclusion that the walking distances to most of the services and amenities exceeds acceptable limits. The location of services and facilities are generally spread around the settlement, and the walking distance described by officers have not taken into account the shortest route to the services at the western side of the village through the Millennium Park, which would not only bring walking distance into an acceptable range, but also provide a safe, lit, attractive and traffic-free walking route. The applicant's transport consultant to my left is here to answer any questions you might have on those walking routes. We'd also like to make clear there are no statutory objections to the proposal, and just to clarify, HSE, on the HSE point, this relates to the treatment works, which is a historic matter, and the HSE has confirmed that the scheme falls below the 10% development threshold, and therefore they have no ongoing concerns about the proposal. The applicant is committed to securing all planning obligations for financial contributions which have been requested, which include contributions to primary school and secondary school, as we've heard, increasing the capacity of the GP surgeries, delivering for off-site open space and public rights-of-way improvements. In bringing this to a conclusion, The applicant has demonstrated the proposals accord with Policy 6 in the County Durham Plan and all other relevant policies. We therefore urge you to approve this application, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Neil. At this point, do any members have any questions for the speakers? No. Louisa, do you want to come back on anything?
Yes, so I'll just come back on a few points. Firstly, some points raised by Councillor Heaviside. He queried about the loss of the agricultural land. Now, it is qualified as 3B moderate agricultural land, so it's not best and most versatile agricultural land. So although it is used for agriculture at the moment and has been in the past, the loss of this land isn't considered a significant reason to refuse the application, so therefore that hasn't been included as a reason for refusal. Councillor Heaviside mentioned about concerns about crossing at the S-bend. There is actually a new crossing proposed over to the proposed new bus stop on Front Street, which isn't as an adequate distance from that S-bend for safety, so there will be a crossing there. The new footways are 1.5 metres wide, and that has been accepted by highways officers. In terms of sort of the education requirements, the monies are detailed by our education officer. Obviously, I know sort of there was concerns about sort of Ofsted and chances for extensions in the future and whether that's realistic. But we can have a clause in a 106 in the event that the monies can't be spent at the most local school, that they go to the next school. So they would be spent at another school in the area if that was the case, that they couldn't be spent at the most adjacent school. In terms of the new bus provision, again, we've had that confirmed by our Sustainable Travel Officer that it is possible to reroute the bus route. Obviously, we can't confirm the longevity past a 5-year period. In terms of the points raised by one of the objectors, yes, we accept that there isn't a great amount of jobs in Great Lumley, but we do look at the services and facilities. Obviously, there won't be lots of jobs in a lot of the villages in County Durham. It is more in the towns and city centres. So although that is the case, it's more that we're looking at the services facilities in the villages and how close the development is to those instead. In terms of the point raised by Mr Westwick at Lichfields in respect of the walking distances, we did look at the most logical and direct routes in terms of the distances. I know he mentioned that there was another route that we perhaps had overlooked, but we considered that to be a convoluted route to the services, and it would be unlikely that most new residents would take that route, so we discounted that. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we open to debate, I would just mention that the land will be loss of agricultural land, which seems to carry no weight these days. However, as a farmer, I see it as a almost 20-acre site growing a crop of corn that could be expected to yield 2 tonne to the acre. So that's 40 tonnes of grain for a country that needs food in every direction. I just throw that in. It's worth nothing, they tell me. But we'll now go over to the committee to debate. Alan first, then Carl, then Patricia.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. George. And yeah, as always, great point made as regarding the loss of these fields, what they use for food production. I'm not going to go over it. I think everybody, you know, like Phil, Margaret and Len have made some absolutely brilliant points, and thank you for that input. But the case officer, Louisa, like, so many thanks. That the report's absolutely brilliant. I think you've sort of listed everything in there. A couple of things. There's one from the applicant is regarding the walking routes, which was highlighted there, like sort of when it's in the report it says it hasn't taken the best route. Anybody who knows the village, you kind of walk to the school going down through Worcester Close, or you kind of go down to the snooker club or to the church down through Worcester Close. So fully understandable how Louisa has like sort of discounted that that claim, because it just doesn't make sense. You wouldn't go that route. At the end of the day, there's no getting away from the narrow paths which this site has from the east and also from the Cocken Lane. It is what it is. You know, the size of the paths, even bringing them up to 1.5 metres wide, it still doesn't sort of comply with that national guidance of 1.8. So we're still not going to be hitting that width. In recent years, the school had an allotment just past this application site, and you had to walk up Cocken Lane to get to the George Pitt allotments. Unfortunately, the school stopped doing that because of the danger side of it, of the school children having to walk that path, and that was a loss, you know, for the children who thoroughly enjoyed doing the allotment. But unfortunately, safety had to come first, and parents and the schools didn't want the children walking along that route. So to come here today to put 150 houses in and expect children to walk that route, it would just be, yeah, it's too dangerous. Louisa, could we put the first picture up on which shows the settlement, please, if that's okay, just before I sort of sum up. Just with the red line on. Yeah, there. That picture says everything for me. The village is square, and we said, you know, 2 years ago we had a site down at Scorers Lane which squared it off, and you know that was accepted in the village. New application, regeneration, all that, and it went down well. Lots of support, little objections. This sort of just adds on again, and like, so where do you know, what if this application was approved? The next thing you know, you're going to sort of be going north and sort of, yeah, both sides of it to square it off again. So where do you stop? And as I said, I just wanted to make that point. That says everything for me. That red line is like we're just going, you know, into unsustainable locations. Thank you for that, Louise. History of the site. The site was put forward for consideration as an allocated site in the Durham plan. Officers, again, that wasn't accepted. Officers all along have been consistent with the pre-application with the developer to say it's the site's unsustainable area, and yet again today the full application has come in, and you know, true to the word, the case officers are stuck by the guns, and it is what it is. It's sort of, yeah, it's an unsustainable location. Secondary schools, big thing. This year, the Parkview, Chelsea Street, that's seen a number of 95 pupils oversubscribed there. 18 of these children in the Lumley division have sadly not getting into the school because of this sort of oversubscription. These children have sort of now expected, you know, there was one case where children have been asked to go to Seaham, Stanley and further afield, even over into the Sunderland boundary. To add such an application and the amount of children into the area, it just obviously will make things a hell of a lot worse than already what they are. In relation, and Phil touched on this, the 106, where, and I regularly bring this up in the committee, the 106 money to go towards the schools. Parkview is an academy, and they're sitting on much like sort of previous 106, and for many years there's no extension happened and there's no site. Again, as Phil said, the Department of Education, the recent Ofsted report, that's not going to happen anytime soon. And, you know, we've got an enormous problem on our hands for the children who historically have gone to Parkview for 45 years. And now, like sort of first time, we've now got 18 children not able to get into this school where, you know, where their parents or even grandparents went for over the last 40 years. The bus stop in relation, I did speak about this earlier to a case officer. The bus, I've never seen this happen before, where a developer will come forward and suggest like putting a bus stop in, and also to make contribution to the bus company to reroute the buses. I think going down that path is, you know, it's a dangerous thing, because like it's a kind of, the site's unsustainable, but if the developers are coming in trying to make it a sustainable location. So I think it's a very dangerous thing to go down. I fully would not support such a proposal as that. In summary, the site's very unsustainable, very poorly linked to the village, and would bring significant harm to the open countryside. In a nutshell, we hear 253 objections. Many residents here today, they don't want it, the village don't want it, the parish council don't want it, and certainly myself and Phil, as county councillors, we don't want it. And for me, and I always regularly say this in committee, listen to the locals. If the locals don't want it, that's got to carry a lot of weight. Thank you. And sorry, so on that note, I'd like to move the officer's recommendation for refusal, along with the amended refusal which Olivia mentioned there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alan. Carl Marshall, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just check first off, because there was some issues raised by the applicant which I think were quite important, and I wouldn't mind Stephen or the officer's view on some of the statutory responses, because the presentation made it clear that there were several statutory consultees and objections raised, and then there were some further objections from the landscape team and things like that. Now, the applicant alluded to the fact that those may have changed, and clearly they would have a big sway on your decision. That would be helpful to get those clarifications. But I think that said, I think for me, I've always been very pro-development where we can, but the whole point of having a plan is to get that development into the right parts of the county. And we spent a lot of time and a lot of effort in producing the County Durham plan and the policies that sit beneath it to direct the development and the type of housing we need into the parts of the county where it's needed. And for me, this particular site seems to extend the settlement in a direction into the open countryside that I don't particularly feel fits with the policy 6 and some of the flexibilities in the plan. So I'm minded at this stage to support refusal of it, but I would like those clarifications from the officer around whether any of those consultees have changed their mind since the presentation was put together, and how much bearing that actually had on her recommendations that are outlined in the report.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. I think so. The two consultative responses, I believe, were landscape and the health and safety executive. So if I just start with landscape, that was the most up-to-date position. It didn't actually say that there was an objection from landscape. Landscape had given several views during the course of the application. The application has positively evolved in landscape terms, and their last sort of comments were basically, they did say that it was an incursion into the countryside, but they said that the harm was to a localised level, so it wouldn't have wider landscape impacts. And then they left it really to the case officers to decide, to make a judgment call themselves on the landscape harm. In terms of the health and safety executive, we haven't had a further response from them. So they were saying that they had concerns that there were hazardous substances at Lumley Water Treatment Works. We had discussions with Northumbrian Water independently, and they believe that that relates to a historic record, that it's no longer the case that, I think it was chlorine that was being stored on site. That's no longer the case. It needs to be reviewed and updated, and that taken off the register, but that hasn't been done. So that's the situation. So that's sort of the latest position on that. What that means was if this were to be approved rather than refused, we couldn't actually make that decision today, because of what the HSE are saying. We would actually have to refer it to the Secretary of State.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just add to Louisa's point there, and I think it's a good point from Councillor Marshall in terms of how planners have assessed the landscape issues here. Chair, as members will be aware that there's sometimes planning applications that generate a significant landscape objection based on pure and direct landscape impacts. And I think, just to add to what Louisa was saying there, and so this is an application I've been involved with as well for a number of years through speaking with Litchfields and Bellways on the scheme. I think what we're talking about here, and the plan, I think the plan which is up at present, I think that really tells a picture as well, that in terms of how we've looked at this under Policy 6, and one of the criteria which is referenced in the report is about how a site sits with a settlement, and I think both the plan up on the wall and the photographs which were shown earlier show the existing built form of Lumley, in the view of planning officers, does have quite a robust and well-defined settlement profile at present. And what we have here is something that leaps out beyond the settlement, that in our judgment means it fails to comply with criteria in Policy 6. So yes, we don't technically have a strong landscape objection based on pure and simple how it fits in the landscape, but when that's put in a general planning policy parlance, if you like, I think there is a clear view from planners that it doesn't fit the Policy 6. Again, as members will be aware, we have worked positively and proactively with a number of developers since the adoption of the county plan to recommend approval, and indeed members have accepted that recommendation for a number of Policy 6 sites, and I think we're up into double figures now of Policy 6 sites that have received support, but in my judgment those have been sites that have been better related to the settlement and actually better related in terms of scale and form to a settlement as well. So I hope that's helpful, Chair, in clarifying planners' thoughts.
Thank you, Stephen and Louisa.
Can I just come back on that, because that's really helpful? I think given everything that's been said, I'm minded to second Councillor Bell's proposal that we go along with the officer's recommendation and refuse this application, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. We've got Patricia next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Everything's virtually been said. One of the things that I was quite worried about was the density of the plan, because I often think that density causes health and well-being issues. Also, it is farmland, whether it be grade 3 or not. It is farmland, and stuff, you know, like as you said, it can be used. It definitely is outside the built settlement. There is no doubt about that, looking at that picture. So I'm of the view, the same as Councillor Marshall and Heatherside, although you can't vote, yes, that the decision that the officer has made is the correct decision. It's outside the council plan, and I think that that's the right call. This is there's the situation with the breeding birds, loss of hedgerows. That, if you look at the picture, that settlement obviously is very precious to the people that live there, otherwise there wouldn't be all these people here today. And I do think that we have to listen to parish councils, otherwise there's no point in having them. You know, parish councils know their area, they know their residents, they know what's in that field and on that footpath. So I'm quite happy to go with refusal.
Thank you very much for that. David Boyce, please.
Thanks, Chair. David Boyce from Easington. A lot of mention's been made of the County Durham plan, and I can just say thank the Lord that we've got this now, because a few years ago, when we didn't have the County Durham plan, this probably would have got through because we wouldn't have been able to stop it. In fact, we had a couple of developments over in East Durham because of that. Because we didn't have the County Durham plan, they got through. So at least these kind of speculative developments, now that we've got the plan, and I agree entirely about plan number 6 and 10 of the plan, they definitely don't accord to that. I would also put 44 should contribute positively to the built and historic environment. I don't think it does that, as well as 29. Again, I want to thank the local input you know, we can't always take that as read, because obviously local input, a lot of people are going to be opposed to particular developments, but I think if we're going to look at the housing supply, whether it's outweighing the impacts of the application or the adverse effects of the application, well, in this particular instance, to me, it doesn't outweigh the positive effects, and I think I would have to agree with what the planner's recommendation is. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, David. Simon Wilson, please.
Councillor Simon Wilson, Saracen Division. Yeah, very much of what's been said. I think the big thing for me here is I do understand from what's been said the positive bits that Bellway have put forward. However, ultimately, there's such a significant raft of issues with this. I think the Policy 6 is massive. The fact that we've got that it's classed as unsustainable, the incursion into the countryside. For me, I'm quite happy to go with the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Simon. John Higgins next, please.
Thank you, Chair. John Higgins, Wingate Ward. I can first confirm what the local member said about the incident yesterday when we did the site visit regarding the traffic. And I agree with what a lot of members have already said regarding why they are going to support the officer recommendation. But what I would like to add is, one of my major concerns is the access at both entrances. Basically, yes, there is recommendations to do some alterations on the road, but to me, whatever alterations you did on that road, it's just going to leave an accident waiting to happen. I cannot see any improvements that can be made on that road to go into that site. And the other thing that I did take quite notice of, if you were living basically in the middle of that new proposal, and someone who hasn't got transport, and we've got a lot of people who don't have their own transport, and they have a disability, they're going to have a very difficult job to walk into the village to use the local facilities. Therefore, Mr Chairman, I will be supporting the recommendation for refusal.
Thank you, John. Finally, Maura McKean.
Thank you, Chair. I'm convinced by the officer's arguments and I'm happy to support refusal, but I wanted to come back on a couple of the points that have been made. The first is around the sustainable transport and walking route that the applicant suggested. I just wanted to say that as a woman who sometimes leaves the house on her own, I wouldn't walk through a park no matter how well lit after dark, which is around 4 p.m. in these parts in the winter. And I do see we've got 2 gentlemen here from the applicant and no women, and I just wondered how many women you include when you put sustainable walking routes together, because I'm sure I'm not the only woman who feels that way. It's a massive issue for women's safety. I would always stick to a path next to the road. And so if you could be just a little bit more robust in taking women's needs into account when you're putting walking routes together next time, that would be very much appreciated. And I see that DCC have put some thought into that, or that's the impression I get. And the second is that 3 members this morning, 3 of my colleagues, have made comments around the use of arable land for housing development. I see that these 3 colleagues are, let's say, of more senior generations to me. They might not fully understand that for someone of my generation, it's harder basically than ever before to get on the property ladder. And I'm making an assumption that other members on this committee are homeowners. I am not. I am 29 years old. Houses are several times more expensive than the amount of money I bring in every year. And as a person on my own, it is going to be more difficult for me to get on the housing market now than if I'd been part of a previous generation. We are at some point going to have to build on arable land in order for people of my age to be able to afford homes of their own. That in and of itself I don't think is ever going to be a good enough reason just to turn down the possibility of someone having a home they can call their own for life. But on this occasion, that's not a sustainable piece of land, and I'd like to thank everyone who's come along today and given such impassioned speeches for all that you've said to us, and thank you to the massive showing from the residents of Lumley as well.
Thank you, Maura. Some relevant points as usual. I didn't know you were that old. I thought you were just about 21. But when agricultural land is gone, it's gone. We do need developments, but they've got to be in the right place. Alan, you want to come back in?
Yeah,
please?
just a final wrap it up, George. It's a comment on the estate which this proposal wraps around. The estate, as we keep referring to, is Stainmore. It's around about 30 years old now, I believe. It's absolutely beautiful, much desired estate, and just a point like such a development would absolutely ruin it to make it such an extensive, and looking at that's probably double the size, if not more. Yeah, so like, thank you for everybody's input on this one. But just to put on record to the planning department and to Stephen Reid there, they came out and did a drop-in session for the residents, and that was very much appreciated. And they came out very neutral, listened to everybody, and went back. And and here we are today. And it was to put that on record to thank the department for coming out of hours and doing that presentation at that drop-in at the community centre. Thank you.
Thank you. Jonathan Elmer, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm brand new to this committee today, and so I wasn't able to go on a site visit yesterday, and I'm quite new to focusing on this particular application as well. But I do want to make some general points about it, particularly in relation to the basic sustainability of the development. There's quite a distance to walk to access services, and the arrangements for bus provision seem shaky to me, and especially given that they're pretty much dependent on a subsidy that the developer will be paying. So that raises all sorts of questions as to how long that subsidy can be maintained, and therefore bus provision and into the future. So all of those things combine to create what we call car dependency, and we're moving forwards to a point where we really want to try and diversify transport so that there's a much greater use of people walking and cycling and active and public transport. So this is pushing in the other direction to that. It's going to ultimately force people to own a car in order to access services for the large majority of people there. I'm obviously also looking at the shape of the application and its incursion into the countryside. There is a clear policy breach there. And it's really important, especially with these very large applications, to avoid inadvertently the council setting precedents by allowing something that is clearly not aligned with the shape of the existing community. So I'd like to also, by and large, support everything everybody else has said and agree with the officer's recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We've had a good debate and we have no further hands up. I've got a mover and a seconder for refusal, which is the officer's recommendation. All those in favour of refusal? That's unanimous. Thank you. Anybody wishing to leave is quite welcome to do so, but you could also stay and watch the rest of the meeting if you wish. Okay, David. Comfort break for those that need it. Is that Maura again wanting to chat, I know? You're probably right on that one. Anyway, we move on to the second application, 5B, land to the east of Regent's Court, Sherburn Road. And we'll now go over to Graham Blakey to present his application, please. Sorry, before you start, I should just maybe add that we have 5 registered speakers and 3 people registered speakers who are in attendance to answer questions. Now, Graham, sorry.
No problem, Chair. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Here we have a different application. This one, a reserve matters application for 470 dwellings, part of a site to the eastern side of Durham City near Regent's Court, south of Sherburn Road. Sorry, that's not working. In terms of the site here, we have it in the outline red form. It is located at the eastern side of the city, sandwiched between the A1M on the eastern side, Sherburn Road estate and the wider Dragonville area to the north. It is allocated within the County Durham plan as a sustainable urban extension to the city of Durham. In aerial form, we can see the archaeological trial trenching, which indicates the bulk and main body of the site, together with a triangular field to the northeast. More visible is a complex of buildings around Bent House Farm area to the southwest, a collection of original converted historic farm buildings, and also visible is to the ever-decreasing slopes down towards the Durham Beck, the wiggly, wavy line at the bottom of your screen. Unfortunately, something's playing. The pointer's having fun with me this morning, so I'll try and use something different. Here we have a view from the Mill Lane Overbridge over the A1 looking north, which shows the application site in its original agricultural form from 2019. This highlights the strong views of the site that were taken from those key routes to the south. Sorry, something's not quite working with this laptop all of a sudden. Next, we have views from differing times of year of the Bent House Lane of the boundary with Bent House Farm, highlighting the current status of that boundary against the application site. Clearly, summertime on the west and wintertime on the eastern, the right-hand side of the screen. Just highlighting the different points of that boundary in terms of its visual permeability, etc. No. Something's not quite working with this. Two ones, folks. There we go. The application, like I said, proposes 470 dwellings as shown here by the proposed site layout. Shown through the site are areas of sud basins running through the spine of the middle of the site and around the southern boundary. A primary spine road can be seen taking access from Sherburn Road and the tree structure belt planting to the southern boundaries together with the Bent House Lane. An existing hedgerow is retained as part of the proposals through the eastern spine of the site. Character areas have been developed by the applicants in conjunction with officers to reflect the agreed design code from the outline consent. Here we have the central character area overlooking the central dual use SUDS area. Within that, there are use of renders and grey roof colourings to reflect the wider Giles Gate and Sherburn Road approach to the site from the city. On the lower half of the screen, we can see that the southern portion of the site, a more rural material palette is sought, with stone and mixed brick, with the introduction of red roof colourings to reflect a transition from the site outwards towards the countryside. Getting better at catching this now. Key to the scheme, though, is the proposed structure, planting and landscaping around the site. Here we show the structure planting in a bit more detail to the southern boundary to soften the appearance of the development from the south and the A1, as well as those larger arrows you can see, visual points of permeability from within the site out with across the wider landscape. To the southwest boundary with Bent House Farm, which is on the left-hand side of the screen, there's a continuation of this structure planting in part, and it includes further planting to supplement the existing vegetation on the boundary outside of the site. Following detailed consideration of the proposals, consultees are satisfied with the proposal subject to conditions where they deem necessary. Various representations have been received from local councillors and organisations, some of whom will be speaking after this presentation, but their comments are summarised in the report that has been given to committee. From the representations received, a mix of concerns have been raised, ranging from the housing mix, densities of development, sustainability of the proposed new housing, and the amenity of nearby residents. A single letter of support was received welcoming new housing into the area. So in summary, the site before you today is allocated for housing in the County Durham Plan and was granted outline planning permission by this committee in October 2021. For determination today are the matters of appearance, landscaping, layout and scale of the proposed development, in essence the detail. There has been local involvement with the community by both officers and the developers, which has led to the amendments to the proposed scheme which officers now consider to adhere to the policies within the County Durham Plan. We therefore recommend these proposals be approved by the committee, and hopefully I can work this computer better if anybody has any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Graham. I generally find if you chuck a bit coal in the back, it works better.
Sorry, Chair, just before going on, I've just realised I've got a late representation. It was just on the bottom of the penultimate slide. I would like to go through that. Just caught that at the end, if that's okay. This is a representation that came in from a resident of Benthouse Farm between publication of the report and the meeting today. So I'm just going to go through that with regards to the application, this one. The scale of development at 470 homes they consider means that the remaining reserve matters cannot be appropriately fulfilled for this gateway development. Drainage is one of the points raised. The lead local flood authority, i.e. the council, the resident has noted their latest submission. There remains queries and concerns regarding the SUD's failure route, with one of the SUDs located close to the Benthouse Farm. The various topographical engineering maps suggest overflow drainage could potentially direct towards the farm. With regards to the compensatory land improvement land boundary, i.e. land to the south of the application site, despite requests to the original applicant banks, with the residents have still not been seen any further detail of what that mitigation work would be, when it would be done to the land abutting the bottom of the farmhouse and the Crooked Barn, i.e. the complex of buildings, including the area between Benthouse Farm and the proposed southeastern footpath exit, which I'll go on to highlight. Those exits to the southwestern side is too close to the boundary of the residential properties of Benthouse Farm and risks accident. It would be better suited if they were further away to possibly the east and north at a natural gap in the hedge, which is onto Benthouse Lane itself. I welcome further consideration being made to the siting of the southwestern eastern access in terms of the variation of the 106 agreement, which may exit to rejoin the public right-of-way. Such change will improve the security around the farm complex and encourage use of the proposed public right-of-way. So I'll just put that on the landscape drawing, if I can. So the top there, the sort of southwestern access point is located on sort of the northwest, if we look on that plan, which is a footpath connection onto Benthouse Lane at the very southern extreme of that western boundary. There's a small gap in the hedge, which is not necessarily where the photographs here were taken, but roughly in the location to the right off sort of camera, if you like. There's a gap in the hedge, just looking to align that up, and it gives a bit of access and safety with the vehicular main access into Benthouse Farm. With regards to the southeastern access, which is at the very bottom of that plan on the left-hand side, there's a new public footpath being provided as part of the outline consent. That then heads south towards Old Durham Beck and connects up with the east-west public footpath that's there. That's being created as part of the outline consent. And there's just some concerns about its position from residents and its proximity to the corner of their boundary. So a bit of background as to what those mean. The final area is the landscape buffer, which is obviously shown on the left. Improvements have been made from the initial submission. The woodland buffer remains just 6 to 7 metres wide in parts, but variably a wildflower marshland scrub area. The overall buffer depth has not changed, with some roadway parking just 16 metres away. This buffer remains outwith that required to achieve the requirements of Policy 5N. Denser buffering is required in this area, requires access restriction with hedgerow and fencing, so preventing access into that area for people from within the estate. And finally, should this proposal be approved, then we request that conditions are put in place to address these continuing issues and that Benthouse Farm complex residents remain consulted upon these crucial conditions. Apologies for that, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now then, we should be moving on to letters from the local members who can't attend, but Maura, do you need to say anything? Thank you. Yes. So the local members aren't able to be here today, so we've got a letter from the Mavins and a letter from Christine Fletcher that Kirsty will hopefully read out. Thank you.
Councillors Eric and Leslie Mavin would like to record some objections to the plan presented in the revised documents. We do not oppose housing development on this site, but as local councillors we must take into account and support the concerns of residents who will be affected by this development. We are pleased with the engagement shown by both Durham County Council and the two builders, Barrett Homes and Miller Homes, with ourselves and the residents of the Benthouse Farm complex. We particularly welcome the amendment that introduces 24 much needed and strongly argued for bungalows. There's been an improvement made to the green buffer with improved planting, but it is still too thin in places at 7 metres. With a reduction in the number of dwellings, many more dwellings are proposed than the Council's original suggestion. A 20-metre buffer could be provided the full length, not just further east. County Durham Plan Policy 5 provides for up to 390 houses on this part of Site H6, but the current application is for 470. For the residents of Benthouse Farm, we would like to see this planting of the buffer to be in a place from the beginning and mature specimens used. A 20-metre buffer throughout would also help alleviate the concern that the Benthouse Farm properties will be overlooked due to the elevation of the site. This would go some way to reflect the requirement in County Durham Plan Policy 5.N that the development should respect and protect the character and integrity of Benthouse Farm and its rural setting. The plan shows possible pathways at the southern boundary leading to the bottom of the gardens of the farmhouse and Crooked Barn properties. This raises some security concerns with residents and a possible avenue for antisocial behaviour. The pathway proposed does not link to any current viable path and seems to serve no purpose. We would like this removed from the plans. We also request that the footpath cycleway access at the bottom end of the site out onto Benthouse Lane be moved further away from the entry lane to the Benthouse Farm complex. There is a safety concern as the exit from Benthouse Farm is up an incline and visibility is currently poor in both directions. As well as the County Durham Plan Policy failings, there are inadequacies regarding sustainability and design. The Reserved Matters application is deficient in meaningful net zero design and all other aspects of sustainability. The City of Durham Trust has set out detailed arguments and proposed amendments to mitigate these inadequacies, and we support their proposals. This is from Councillor Fletcher from Belmont Division. I'm sorry that I cannot be at this committee meeting in person. Thank you for reading this to the committee on the 6th of June. I would like to thank the officers in the County Durham Planning Department for their work on this development. I would also like to thank Banks and Barrett at Miller, Banks, Amy Ward and Barrett, Edward Burton at Miller for their time over the past few months. We've been able to have discussion and community input into this development, not generally given to communities. I hope this has set a positive example for community collaboration which will be used by other house builders. I am generally supportive of this development, but with a few remaining concerns. Whilst I am pleased to see a wider mix of homes, including bungalows, I am still concerned that there are too many properties proposed to be installed on this site. The proposed development, which was given outline planning permission, stated a defined maximum number of properties on the site, which was 400 houses on the field and 20 adjacent to Benthouse Lane. It remains my view that the 470 houses proposed for this site is too many and that is why so many are minimum size and there isn't enough space to allow the paths to be wide enough for multi-use. I remain concerned about the buffer zones. It states that the woodland boundary should be a 20-metre buffer zone between the residents in Benthouse Lane farmhouse and barns. However, it is still only 7 to 10 metres in places, and the residents feel both vulnerable and also that this will not protect the character and integrity of Benthouse Farm. I am still concerned about crime and community safety. There are a number of access points with no protection of any kind, such as a chicane, kissing gate or cycle gate. These are needed to prevent quad bikes or other such vehicles to enter and exit the site. Along with Gilesgate Residents Association, I note with optimism that all the properties on the site will now be constructed in line with the revised Part L regulations for energy efficiency. However, I haven't been able to identify any printed materials which states how the proposed properties will be made to fulfil the Part L regulations. Will there be, for example, solar panels? Will heat pumps be included? I feel that it would be somewhat negligent of the committee to approve this application should these details not be made available for due consideration. Thank you for your time today to consider the application.
Thank you, Kirsty. We've now got 4 objectors who will have 2.5 minutes each, and Kirsty will let you know when you've got 30 seconds remaining. Carol, I know you wanted extra, but on today's schedule we just can't allow that, so if you could cut out wherever necessary, please. And Patrick, it's nice to see you. You look well.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
So 2.5 minutes, Carol.
Thank you, Chairman, and I'm going to stay seating so that I'm close to the mic, if that's okay. Despite what was just been said by the officer, the application fails many policies, but as you've commented, I don't really have time to go into those right now, so I'll dive straight in. The construction of the 470 houses, as we've heard, is not appropriate for the site and is not what was originally agreed in the plan, the County Durham plan. Policy 5 also insists that this site must provide a positive gateway for Durham City, particularly from the A1M, which it will see as it comes up. And we don't know how it's going to be achieved. So there's so many deficiencies here that we just don't know. All new residential development must comply with the nationally described space standards. These only applied to outline or full application approved 1 year after the County Durham plan was adopted in 2020. But it's now 2023. They apply now. And what is proposed here is the developer's bog-standard ticky-tacky house types, even identified by the weary southern names of the various outdated building styles. Indeed, as the officer confesses, the outcome of the Building for Life system, which is based on 12 questions, produces only 4 of the 12 to score a green ranking. This is totally unacceptable. Although we welcome the bungalows, the addition of bungalows, the proposed 24 bungalows shared between the 2 developers are still far too small in size. The size of the gardens exceeds the house footprint, which creates a larger garden for elderly residents to maintain, when extra internal space would be far better. County Durham Plan Policy 22 was designed to reduce the dominance of the car. Yet there's still no provision for a bus service into the estate. Families living here will therefore depend heavily on their cars, which will encourage excessive parking provision or parking clutter on the streets. And finally, the most important thing, which Christine Fletcher mentions, is the energy. We've all declared climate emergencies, yet this development gives no detail about the EPC ratings. They're below EPC A. We don't know about level of insulation. We don't know if it's going to be established to the, connected to the gas network. Please, can we know more details about whether these houses will have air or ground source heat pumps, EV chargers, and so on? This is really vital. We have the chance to establish a new development to be a beacon for the whole county, let's start now. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Patrick, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, at the onset, can I say that Belmont Parish Council, on who I'm speaking now, are not opposed to the development, and in fact recognise the very constructive discussions that have taken place between the applicants and local people, and that many of the outstanding issues have been resolved. However, we also note, in fact, that there are a number of points that still haven't been settled, and these have been raised, interestingly enough, in terms of the Belmont and Gilesgate neighbourhood plan discussions that have been going on now for about a year as we work towards that neighbourhood plan. Belmont Parish Council notes, as has been said, that the County Durham Plan Policy 5 states the housing allocation for this part of the area of Durham is for 420 units. We also further note that on this particular site it is actually 390, and that 30 units are on the adjacent western side of Benthouse Lane. That land is in the ownership of DCC. But this reserve matters application is for the land privately owned to the east of Benthouse Lane, and we believe that consistent with the County Durham plan, it should be for 390 units. If it were, then we believe the outstanding issues could well be satisfied in terms of additional conditions and in terms of further discussions. In summary, as has been said, the reserve matters on which you are being asked to make a judgment cover scale and layout. 390 units would solve many of the concerns about proximity, about area, roads and footpaths. It would also, in fact, begin to look at design and appearance, covering size of the properties. Paragraph 92 of the report suggests that because of sequencing, this application is exempt from that. And this is unfortunate because between 30 and 35% of the properties on the footprint do not meet that standard. And finally, as has already been said, Durham County Council is to be applauded for its work on climate change and for its very clear policies on that. Further discussions between the developers and local people on making this development compliant with carbon-free and energy efficiencies would be welcomed. So Belmont Parish Council therefore requests additional conditions relating to the scale, design and to energy efficiency, and we believe then that we will have a housing development that will be a credit to the Durham city and a credit indeed to the developers. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Barry Evans on behalf of residents at Benthouse Farm next, please. You'll have 2.5 minutes and Kirsty will let you know when you've got 30 seconds left.
Thank you, Chairman. Policy 5.N of the County Durham Plan includes the requirement that the development should respect and protect the character and integrity of Benthouse Farm and its rural setting. The proposals now put forward do not, in our view, meet the requirement as intended or envisaged by the policy or our expectations. Banks, in their outline planning application, provided data suggesting a dense 20-metre woodland buffer to the east of Benthouse Farm, but a lesser treatment thence across to Benthouse Lane. We suggested in our discussions with banks that the 20-metre buffer be extended to cover Benthouse Farm in its entirety through to Benthouse Lane. They stressed that all data was illustrative and it would be for the nominated developers to fully detail the site. At the outline planning meeting in October 21, we were advised that in respect of questions raised concerning the buffer zone, that the nominated builder would consult with the interested parties prior to the submission of a reserved matters application. This did not happen, and subsequent to the application in July 22, we thus approached them and secured a meeting on site on 15th of August. Subsequently, we had email exchanges and further on-site meetings right up to 27th of March 23, acknowledging minor amendments to the border treatment. Native structure planting so described is just 6 to 7 metres in critical spots.
30 seconds remaining.
And just 3 to 4 metres at the east end of the farmhouse property. average is less than 10 metres. A proposed visitor parking bay diverts a proposed footpath to just 16 metres from the boundary. The area between the footpath, parking bay and native planting is proposed to be wildflower meadow. These spaces will, without doubt, be utilised as play areas. What we need and have asked for in the absence of a proper 20-metre buffer is a robust, impenetrable, continuous hedge to the immediate south of the proposed footpath to best retain the integrity of the Bent House Farm complex. The builders have conceded that the requirement to deliver the number of properties...
Thank you, Barry. That's the time. Well up, thank you. John Ashby next, please. City of Durham Trust.
Thank you, Chair, and the Gilesgate Residents Association. First, I'm afraid I need to protest at the City of Durham Trust's very substantial objections submitted on the 25th of May are still not on the County Council's planning portal, so members who had wanted to find out what we'd said cannot do so. We agree very much with all the points that have been made, and I'll try not to repeat them. The root cause of the problems with the application is trying to cram too many houses on the site. You've heard the numbers. It's now all too clear from the current detailed application that 470 is far too many, causing failures of the Policy 5 clear requirements for the protection of the character and integrity of Bent House Farm, for adequate multi-use paths, for generous green spaces, and for a bus service within the site, and for the protection of the magnificent views to and from Durham Castle and Cathedral World Heritage Site. One of the reserved matters is scale, and we say that 470 is demonstrably out of scale, and this should be a robust ground for refusal. So too should be the design and size of the proposed houses. Astonishingly, 1/3 of the proposed houses are too small to meet the nationally described space standard, which the County Durham Plan requires all new houses to meet. To allow the developers to get away with substandard houses now would be inexcusable, and the Trust urges the Planning Committee to refuse it. But if not refused, then further conditions are essential to require all houses to meet the nationally described space standard, that the properties comply with the Council's declared intentions for net zero, that the estate paths are genuinely multi-use, and that the paths adjacent to Bent House Farm are relocated and protected as specified in the representation from the Gilesgate Residents Association and by local residents. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, John. We'll move on to the applicant or the applicant's agent, Patrick Arkle from Miller Homes. You'll have 10 minutes, Patrick, and Kirsty will let you know when you have 1 minute remaining.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, everybody. My name is Patrick Arkle. I'm MD for Miller Homes, and I'm representing Carl Soblowski, the MD of Barrett Homes, our partner. On a personal level, I've worked with my company for 33 years. I've built up and down the length and breadth of Durham for almost every year within that, and we've got some great developments that we have completed, which are great examples of great places for people to live in. Recent examples would be Lambton Park and the South Sea and Garden Village, which we have just started. In my experience in house building, Durham is a place where people care about the environment and they care about the history, and I genuinely acknowledge and appreciate all of the people who contribute to this process. I think developers and sometimes local authorities get bad press for quite often wrong reasons. Together we contribute hugely to the wider economy and heritage, and this site, in my opinion, is a really good example of that. I'd like to thank banks, the local planning authority, the residents, the people speaking here today, the parish, local members for Belmont and Gilesgate. we've come across a lot of things that are relatively contentious, but as I said before, contentious is good because that means that people care about what they're approving and what we're building in the area. I think collaboration and communication are ingredients in any sector, and none more so than development. To collaborate effectively, it requires open and honest dialogue and clear guidance to lengthen the debate on issues and how decision-making affects the people that we all represent. I believe the process has resulted in a scheme that exceeds expectations for a lot of people, but I accept not everybody, and I accept your, I understand your points of view as well. There's been dozens of meetings with the local authority. There's been 5 or so meetings with the local residents who gave up their time to help this process. They've helped inform and given some great ideas to help shape that we're incorporate largely into the scheme in a positive and creative way. Your design review process is an excellent yardstick, and I appreciate the work in particular from Graham and Stephen on that. So as a result, we present a scheme that we are proud of and we hope members can support. It's been carefully considered with a mix of house types which offer a real variety for everyone. The scheme has got outline planning approval for 500 units, so you're looking at an application for reserve matters for 470, as you know. So that allows for the 30 on the other side of Benthouse Lane as well. And we're really excited about the opportunity we have here to create a sustainable community. Sustainable communities mean different things to different people, but I believe that in terms of your policy and guidance, that we've exceeded that sustainability. Perhaps in months and years to come, that sustainability may change, and I think it does need to change, but as it stands at the moment, we comply with that. We've got 25% affordable housing, which equates to 118 houses. 66% of the houses within the site are accessible and adaptable. That's building regs part M42, with a further 10% designed specifically for older person needs. This is in the form of the bungalows and the multi-generation housing. The scheme has different character areas, as Graham has kindly pointed out in his report. This means that the houses in each character area will have a different look and feel, and they will create interest across the development, and there will be a nod to the vernacular that we'll get in Durham also. Because of the interaction, we've tried our best to alleviate concerns. We've moved play areas, we've extended, we've pulled housing further into the development, we've amended footpath connections, we've strengthened landscape buffers where possible, and we'll continue to work with the residents if this scheme is supported today. Getting planning approval is only part of it. The hard part really comes as MD for a developer to manage expectations and make sure that we deliver on our promises when and if we do come to get on site. The new homes proposed have been designed to reflect the most recent changes in building regs. So that's Part L 2021. That's something that we wanted to do, Carl and I. So that covers the fuel and power, and as such are more energy efficient. This is particularly welcome given both the ongoing challenge of climate and the cost of living crisis, which the members and the speakers have alluded to, and I agree on that point. The scheme will benefit from many technologies and construction methods to ensure it's energy conscious and as sustainable as possible. Both businesses are dedicated to carbon reduction, and houses across the site will receive products to achieve this. It is considered the development of the site for 470 homes will create investment in the area and increased activity. It'll have tangible benefits to the economy. Not that that's got anything hugely to do with planning. You need to judge it on planning. I absolutely get that. But we will be spending over 70 million on the development, and 40 million of that will go to the local supply chain and local labour force as well. We'll build in stages of different intensity, but on average I'll be approximately 80 workers on the site, so that gives a sense of what will be involved in this development. There's lots of policy changes, just to sum up, that us developers and you guys are trying to balance at the moment, and it's difficult. It's a difficult time for developers, and it's a difficult time for residents and local authorities and members. We've got the PV, the BNG, the M42, and I think collaboration and early engagement is key in all of these sites in Durham. And I thank Stephen for his ongoing efforts to engage with the major house builders to ensure that we're in line with that where we can. So Miller and Barrett, just to sum up, are very proud to continue to invest in Durham. This is a great city and a great county, and long may that continue. Durham is a place where people aspire to live and people love to visit. I believe this gateway into Durham will enhance and celebrate all that Durham stands for. And I do have my colleagues from our consultants, Pegasus, Chris and Charlotte by my side, and our joint development partners from Barrett. I've got Amy and Jason as well. So if there are any questions during this debate, we're more than happy to answer further questions. But thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Did you say you were MD for Miller Homes? Well, just as an observation from the Chair, from the site visit yesterday, you need to do something about your land management. The amount of weed, thistles in particular, on this site is really outrageous. What will happen, those weed seeds will blow whichever way the wind blows. East Durham will be covered in thistles as a result of that. I suggested there was a man called Steve came and met us. Yeah, I didn't pick up his surname, but I mentioned it to him, and it really is in a bad weed state, and it really needs addressing now before they get any bigger. Well, they are fully grown, and they will shortly start to distribute these weed seeds whichever way the wind blows, and they will blow for miles. Thank you. That's just a little bugbear of mine. As Patrick said, we have Amy Ward, Chris Martin, Jason, and someone else, Charlotte, who will answer questions. Do members have any questions they will like to ask? You, Maura, were first, yes, and Mike.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose when we gave this application outline planning permission, we discussed about bus routes and sustainable transport. Now, I do understand that the bus companies in the region are having revenue issues alongside staffing issues, but I don't think anyone anticipates that that's permanent. This is going to be an estate that will have at least 1,500 people living in it. And we did say that even if we couldn't get a bus route to be redirected at the present time, that it was still worth putting some bus infrastructure in the estate in the form of maybe some lay-bys that can be converted to a bus stop later when the revenue issues have cleared for the operators. So I was just wondering where those potential bus stops are on the map, if you could point them to me. Thank you.
Just to come back on that, just quickly, none are proposed as part of this Reserve Matters application.
That's what I feared. Thank you very much for confirming that.
Thank you. Mike Curra, please.
Yes, Mike Curra from Crook. I just wanted to ask a practical question. In my duties on one of the other committees, we often come across applications for HMOs, which the residents normally strongly object to, but it seems almost impossible to reject them. And I just wondered whether there were any conditions on this development that they couldn't be converted into HMOs in the future.
Yeah, on the outline permission, there's we've got a condition on to prevent any of the properties being converted into HMOs. It sits outside of the Article 4 area, so we're very conscious of potentially that loophole, if you like, appearing. So that's on there. So in effect, it's almost treated as part of the Article 4 for ease in the mind, if that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. I've got Jonathan next, please.
Thank you, Chair. This isn't so much of a question, though, so do you want me to save it for a few moments?
Yes, if it's not a direct question for the speakers. Craig, please. Martin.
Craig Martin, Councillor for North Lodge in Chester Street. I was just wondering if the planning officers could just comment on, because one of the kind of the crux of the argument is the number of houses that are being built in this, and I was just wondering if Graham would mind commenting on the kind of balance of this, and yes, this land is in the county plan, but a lot of people have pointed out that it's not for this many houses. So could you just on why you're saying that this should be approved with this kind of increased number?
Of course, Councillor. This probably forms a wider argument as to why the site as a whole was allocated as well. And I think it's come forward as part of the County Durham plan, and as part of formulating that plan, not only as the location of the site, maybe its sustainable credentials in terms of its accessibility to the city have been looked at, as well as applying a standard methodology to the numbers of units per allocation. So every single housing allocation across the county under the County Durham plan does include a number within that. It's a basic 30 dwellings per hectare, take off a developable area. It's a common formula across every single site. What happened during the outline application, which came before this committee a couple of years ago, was the implementation of a site-specific scheme, which was a master plan-driven approach from the developer that looked to highlight an up to 500 units across this and the additional land. And we drilled down quite deeply into how that was achieved. It took a long time to do that, and we were comfortable at that point in terms of the recommendation then that we could go beyond the existing number that was within the County Durham plan, based upon things like the residential amenity SPD, what the master plan was seeking to achieve. Today you have the translation of the master plan, which is into the detail of the scheme, which is different again, and has needed another sense check as part of the design review process. So a little insight into the County Durham plan process and its highlighting of figures towards the site specific, and how we might see a lot of these allocations, especially the larger ones around Durham, translating from envisaged proposals through to detail on the ground.
Thank you. Maura, you have another question.
Mine was more of a comment than a question, so I'm happy to wait until the discussion.
Thanks for that, Maura. No further questions. Well, Graham, do you want to come back with anything more? Okay.
Feel it's a little point of clarification, because it was some of the minor technical information that was raised by some of the objectors and speakers regarding national space standards. It's quite right, the County Durham plan does require all new developments to meet that. However, that was within the policy required as it being implemented on schemes approved 1 year from adoption of the plan. The outline application for which this reserve matters relates was approved within those 12 months. It was an extant application on our books beforehand. So the purposes of highlighting the volume of units that do actually meet the NDSS in the report is to say the proposals actually tabled that where we do not have a requirement as part of this scheme to do so. So that was just to highlight where we are on that. Obviously, it's within the gift of the applicant to propose further, but that's this nature of the policy does not allow us to then seek further on that. Ultimately, what has happened is the sustainability side of things in terms of Part L, which I'm sure we'll come on to, has started to progress things, and things are moving forward, and the site is even different to what it was maybe envisaged to be from that October date in 2021. Thank you, Chair.
Well, it's a little unusual, but we've got a question from the objectors, which I will allow one.
Chair, that's extraordinarily generous. I do appreciate this is a big departure. Just a matter of clarification, the approval was actually in March 2022 because it took 5 months to agree anything with the developer. And that means that well over the year had passed before the approval certificate was issued. I'm sorry to disagree with Graham because he's a smashing bloke, but that's my view anyway.
Well, you started off as a sweet talker, John, and now you've gone and spoiled it. Graham's coming back, I think.
First, John, I'd like to apologise about the lack of comments from the Trust on the website. Can't seem to find those on the website, so but hopefully you've been able to cover some of those through initial reps and again today. Yeah, it's an interesting one. That obviously decision notice does say March 2022. However, it was presented to Planning Committee, if memory serves me right, 17th, 18th, 19th of October 2021. So the resolution for that was granted at that point, and that's basically forms the focus of the decision, and really the discussions afterwards was finalisation of the 106 agreement. A very temporary issue in terms of the County Durham plan and its 1 year build up from that in terms of the implementation of the NDSS. It's not caught very many schemes. Unfortunately, this is one of them that fits in that. However, like I say, we've tried to highlight where we are in terms of that NDSS. So put bluntly, I don't think any party is probably happy with the position of where we are on the NDSS with this site. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Graham. Is this a question, Simon? Okay, well, we'll open up the debate now. And Jonathan, you were first, if that's still all right with you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I mean, when the allocation was originally made in the County Durham plan, I remember being at the examination public during that process, and it's a considerably scaled site, and as you mentioned, the stocking rate, as it were, is 30 per hectare, and that's based on a judgment as to what density is required in order to ensure that you can have proper transport provision, buffering wildlife areas and everything else. And so that was what translated into the 390 proposed for the location, and the application for 470. And the crux of all of the issues connected with this particular application relate to that overstocking. If there wasn't such an effort to cram more houses in, we would be able to have bigger rooms in the houses, potentially better garden spaces. There would be more space available for transport connectivity through the development, so wider footpaths and better cycleways. I don't actually see any mention of provision for cyclists at all. And of course, as Moira mentioned, there's no bus penetration. So from a transport perspective, this application seems to me to be pretty bad. And it all connects with the overstocking. Now, I hear your explanation and justification as to why that happened, and the analysis you had to conduct in order to assess whether or not it was suitable in this instance. But we have also seen that the buffer zones around the application are only 6 metres wide in certain locations, and those buffers are really important for all sorts of purposes connecting to the heritage of the city, reduction of impact in terms of the character of adjacent Benthouse Farm. So because we've put more houses in than the site was actually originally allocated for in the County Durham plan, we're having to make sacrifices in other areas. I'm a little bit frustrated as well at the lack of detail coming forward in relation to as to how the houses are going to meet their low carbon aspirations. Will it be solar? Will there be air source heat pumps? Will there be gas powered? Will there be vehicle charging? There just doesn't seem to be much information on any of these critical aspects that would help us understand and better determine the decision. So I'm a bit frustrated at the lack of detail here and the effort to overpack. So I mean, I guess I'll conclude by saying that my argument isn't against the principle of development at the location. That's gone through a long process of discussion in the County Durham plan process. It's not about the fact that there's development happening there. It's about the fact that this application seems to be trying to cram far too many houses in. Thank you, Chair.
Neil would just like to have a word at that point.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, we've heard quite a bit about how the figures were calculated and various figures, whether that's 420, 470, etc. I think the point that I need to stress to members is there is already an outline permission for up to 500. So to some extent, the scale of up to 500 dwellings on the site has already been established by that outline consent.
But wasn't it said that the other 30 would be on the other side now?
Yes, you're right, Chair. So my understanding is that it's proposed that there's 470 on this part of the site, and then the council-owned part of the site across the way would be for the other 30, making the 500 in total, which is the terms of the outline permission.
Thank you. Nice to clarify something. Maura.
Thank you, Chair. I've got villages in my ward that are smaller than this development, and I'm not including hamlets. I've got 4 substantially sized villages that are smaller than this development, and all of them, bar one, have regular bus routes going through them. We're talking a lot about sustainable transport, and this is a development where I would hope people would live to commute into Durham City. The city, as we all know, does need more families, more people who are going to be living in its vicinity, who are going to be living there full time, to support the high street, because at the moment we have a substantial student population in the city who leave when term is over and the terms are short, and that can make it difficult to sustain some forms of commerce in the city. And so this is part of the rationale for me supporting this planning application when it came as an outline application. But I just can't in good conscience let through a reserve matters application that doesn't include any provision for public transport. We understand that this isn't going to be something that's going to be possible, at least until the entire estate is built out. But it's an absolute disgrace that no provision has been made in the estate, in this plan, for any kind of bus service at all. We already have the 64 bus service, which goes from Durham City up to Sherburn, and it goes around the Gilesgate Moor estate. And you can see quite clearly that you can get a bus down the centre around the green and then back up again if you plan it correctly. And that's absolutely something you should do. And even if it just makes one loop, either going to or from Sherburn, then that's enough to connect the entirety of the bottom half of that estate to all of the amenities on that bus route. And there's a substantial number of amenities on that bus route, because my bloody amenities are on that bus route and I use that bus. So absolutely we should be including buses in here, and I would like to take some legal advice here. I don't want to turn this down entirely, but I would either like to seek a deferment or seek to approve with the addition of bus infrastructure, and I just wondered if any of that was legal.
Stephen's going to come in and respond to that.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think it's a fair point from Councillor McEwen there, but in terms of process, and I think it's something that Graham touched on in his presentation, what we're looking at today procedurally is only reserved matters application, looking at the landscape, the design and the layout. I understand when this committee considered the outline planning application, there was a fair debate, and as we know, provision of bus services within developments is a valid planning issue. So I understand we had that fair debate at the outline stage for reasons which you understand were discussed at that time. It wasn't considered appropriate to make it a condition or a Section 106 requirement to put a bus route into the estate. So on procedural grounds, and I'd like to hear Neil's view on this as well, I think we'd be really struggling, Chair, if members were looking to bring that argument back forward. Now, just talking with Graham, and Graham's reminded me through the work we've been doing with Barrett's and Millers, and indeed the community over the last year or so here. You know, we've been focusing on trying to improve pedestrian links and cycle routes, and there's been talk earlier about links out to the south, but also to the west, to provide connectivity with a wider Sherburn Road estate. And I think the general view is, and again I have to stress this was a view taken at the outline application, you know, which was the time and place really to nail down any bus requirement. I think the general view is that the sustainable cycling and walking options to the south and the west do tip that balance and hopefully get it over that general non-car use bar, which I think Councillor Elmer referred to as well. So that's the way the discussions have gone over the last year and a half, or a year and a bit, with the developers, looking at the outline approval. But I have to say, Chair, I think I'd have to caution advice here. If you were looking to get into the provision of a bus service debate, you know, meritable point as that is, I think this isn't the time and place for it, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just to echo what Stephen Reid said, really. I mean, the application that's before members today is for reserve matters only. So you're looking at appearance, landscaping, layout and scale. The other matters that you've referred to, Councillor, were really things that were discussed or bottomed out, if necessary. Excuse me, as part of the outline. As part of the outline application, so it's not something that's really before you today.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for those responses. I sit on 2 planning committees and I see a lot of planning applications, and I can't remember every single application and when I'm told to wait for reserve matters or not, but frequently we on our committees are told that this is an issue for reserve matters and we are sort of pushed down the line. And this was something that was raised earlier, and I believe I was told, but I can't say for certain, that there could be a discussion about it around this time. But again, as I sit on 2 of these committees. We have a meeting for each every month, and we see at least 2 applications per month. So maybe I'm misremembering, but I do believe it's relevant to here because this is a question of layout. Because I'm not asking for anything more than simply a lay-by at the bottom of the green space, so that a bus can pull in potentially if a bus route's able to come around the estate. There was quite a detailed discussion of it last time, and the sense that I had when I walked away was that this was something that could be discussed again when it came to the reserve matters application, and I would like to see a bus route in there. If you're telling me that there's absolutely no legal way that we can ask for that at this point in time, then there's no legal way. But if there is one, then I would like to make the suggestion, and I would like to move the motion that we accept it with that condition.
Yeah, Chair, I'm afraid I don't think that would be a condition that's within the scope of this authority to impose. It wouldn't meet any of the necessary tests. I mean, certainly, you know, we can ask what the highways officer's view of that is. I'm sure we can ask what the developer's view of an alteration to the scheme along the lines that you suggest, but I don't think we can require it.
Yeah, Phil from Highways.
I think, Chair, on a low trafficked residential road like that, you wouldn't actually require a bus lay-by. You would put bus cage markings down, which clearly could then be done without a change to the approved scheme. So at a later date, if a bus were to go in there, it would be a simple paint on the carriageway rather than a physical lay-by. You only really need a lay-by where there's a heavy flow of traffic and it takes the bus away from the main running lane to keep the road free flowing.
Thank you. But to answer Maura's question, at what point in these reserved matters can we discuss such things?
Chair, I think the answer is we can't, because the reserved matters are for the particular issues that are at the top of the officer's report. So it's not for it's not within the scope of the reserved matters application.
Chair, again, I can only agree with what Neil has just advised the committee. I mean, I'm wondering, and again, I have to stress there'll be no legal weight attached to this, but we're more than happy to take this away as an action from the meeting, and I'm sure the developers would be as well, to hold a meeting with our internal passenger transport team. I mean, I think Phil's just advised the committee that the layout as such seems to be designed that he could potentially take a bus if such a service was viable. Again, Neil's been clear in his advice, and I think I have as well, that we cannot now make this a condition of any approval if members were minded to approve it, but we could certainly make it an advisory note attached to the approval and take it away as an action from today to hold a bit, to get relevant parties around the table to explore the art of the possible. And if something does come out of that, I think we'd all agree that would be a positive step.
Thank you. I hope that helps, Maura. Simon, you've had to wait a while, but it's Simon Wilson next.
Cheers, Chair. As I say, I think the Highways Officer actually managed to answer part of what I was saying there. Having gone down various sort of residential streets in County Durham, rather than a lay-by, we do often just get the sort of drawings on the road. If you go down a lot of our front streets now, and I include my own in Sacriston, we have that on a much busier road as well. So if there is something that can be done in terms of work and away from this, just to put some markings down if a bus route was taken up by the bus companies as well, mind, because that's the further part. However, away from that, in terms of looking at what we're actually dealing with here in terms of the reserve matters, this is, for me, it meets what we need. I understand some of the queries around the different densities from what they thought, but it's within the 500, as we've been told, that was agreed over the site. I'm really happy to see a lot of green space in there. I think it's one of the things that quite often we don't get with developments now. Quite often it's put as many houses on with no green space. I think there's fantastic green spaces there in the middle, around the edges. I think obviously we'll have to wait for a lot of the sort of landscaping to come to fruition, and I think that's obviously like any development, and I understand the concerns of Gateway to Durham as you're coming along the A1. Ideally you'd be passing that at 70 mile an hour as well, mind, or pulling off at a decent speed anyway, so your views aren't going to be prolonged. I think on top of that though, like any development, in time the landscaping that will come through will improve it, and having gone down drove to different places, you see that as it beds in. For me, I think this meets everything we need. It's already been, the outline's been approved. This fits within the outline. I think the design is superb in terms of the pallets that are going across both top and bottom of the sites to sort of to be sympathetic to the areas. So I'm happy to move with approval on the grounds of the officer's recommendation. I think it would be nice maybe if the chair was involved in maybe having a look with sort of our planning team and developers around whether there is space to put those boxes in, as was mentioned by the Highways Officer, because I think that's a fair thing to do. Obviously we can't condition it, but it would be just nice to, as an advisory, as Stephen said there. So I'm happy to go with that.
And you did move that, Simon, didn't you? Thank you. David, over to you.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I sat on this committee when it got debated at outline stage, and can you put the pictures up of the proposed houses, what they're going to look like? Sorry, I have to get up again, Graham. Yeah. Yeah. I can remember we had the debate about the bus stop and stuff, and it wasn't put in as a condition then. That to me looks a very attractive. I think there was another picture. Was there another picture as well? Oh, sorry, mate. Yeah, that's plenty of open space. I think you've got the suds thing in the middle. That looks a very, very attractive scheme. It's when we were saying it was up to 500 houses on that particular part. I think we're looking at about 470 houses. And that's notwithstanding the financial contributions from the developers towards various things. And can I just say as well, it's refreshing to have the MD from Millers come along here, because a lot of times I've been on this committee the same as you have since 2008, Chair, and you get people and you feel it's like lip service to saying the right things because that's what we want to hear, but having actually somebody come across who actually cares and really wants the development to succeed and is sympathetic to the vernacular of the particular what's happening in Durham, that's a really refreshing thing as a member of this particular committee. So if Simon Wilson's proposed, I'm happy to second this, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, David. Alan, do you have your hand up? Alan Bell.
Thank you, Chair. Briefly, and second what David just says there about the developer, and brilliant to be here. And I'll actually say we sort of Miller Lambton is in our area and had zero complaints. It's not a similar thing I can't say about another developer in the division, but yeah, like, so good to be here and to answer all the questions. Two things I just wanted to raise in there, which was being brought up in the presentation. One was the size of the buffer, Graham, and then also what was raised in relation to the SUDs. Somebody wasn't happy with the SUDs, them two areas. And with in the bungalows 10%, is that the Durham plan 10%? It's not 15, 10. Yeah, so the SUDs and the buffer, Graham, was the two areas?
Thank you, Councillor Bell. Yeah, there's been a few different things mentioned as well, and I was waiting to pick up on the detail as and when the debate covered on that. With regard to the buffer, and I think residents and developer alike will say there's been detailed discussions about where that is. It's waxed and waned in terms of where that particular buffer is. I'll just pop the plan up. What is on the screen there is the latest iteration of that particular buffer on that western boundary, and its purpose is dual purpose. One is to help screen the development under the existing popular trees, mature poplar trees there from the World Heritage Site, and that is an essential part of this. And equally, its reverse function is to help sort of separate the development from the residents. And one of the things that we were keen to pick up at design review versus the master plan was basically the building line of the houses there. And that originally came in quite square into the sort of western corner, and I think residents will remember that well. We basically said, look, you need to bring that back to within the master plan parameters. That is where that is in terms of the building line. Okay, there's road infrastructure that goes beyond that into the frontage, but when initially submitted, there was in sort of grassed areas, informal play proposed in the area, and obviously at the bottom end, the sort of lighter shaded area, if you like, is one of the suds basins. What we're hoping to achieve here is a transitional landscape arrangement from the road into higher and higher planting, if you like, with the poplar trees, which aren't in the control of the applicant, nor are any of the boundary sort of planting that you saw on the photographs in the control of the applicant, and phase that in so that the residents of Benthouse Farm feel they've got that separation. In terms of where the landscape team think that is, they think what is proposed on screen is sufficient for that. So we feel as officers we've reached a balance with regards to that landscape buffer. We've pushed and we've tried, and we've got to a point where we think we're going to have to say this is where we can draw the line. In terms of the suds basin, obviously that sits above the site. Obviously one of the things in terms of the plan doesn't show that is the land goes generally from north to south as you look on that plan. One of the detailed conditions that we have in for discharge is the final scheme, and we're looking at basically the suds basins come from north to south to the basin that you see on the left of the screen and head east along the southern boundary to the final basin and then out discharging into the Old Durham Beck through the field. So we have to make sure that obviously when they're designed for climate change events, I think the chap on the site said, 100 years plus 45% for climate change plus various other percentages, those figures are going up and up with every application, it seems. So that when, and if that does fail, that none of the properties nearby are actually affected by it. So we're working with our lead local authority to achieve that on the detail of this. In essence, it won't necessarily change what you see before you're on the screen. It just makes sure that the levels in the immediate area create the relevant channels so that residents have that assurity. And obviously what we'll do as officers and make sure they're aware of what that is and what it is. I hope that answers your
Yeah, no, that's absolutely brilliant, Graham, and yeah, that sounds all good to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Carl.
Thanks, Chair. Obviously, this site's got a really, really long history. It's been allocated in both the previous plans. The first one that obviously was chucked out, and then the second one as well. And then it's been through a full outline application. So I think for me, looking at the actual material plan issues that we've got to deal with as part of this application in front of us today, we'd be absolutely barking mad to try and sort of create sort of arguments against the plan and policy, because I just think they don't exist. I wanted to reiterate really not just the thanks to the MD from Miller for coming along today, but for the way they've engaged with the residents. I think we were always going to reach a point with this where there was going to be a sort of line that wouldn't be or couldn't be crossed, and I think actually Councillor Fletcher alluded to this in the statement that was read out earlier, that there's been a lot of really meaningful engagement which has got this application at this stage, and probably a lot of hard work that got to the stage before and the stage before that and the stage before that. It's been on a long journey, and I think where we've got to is we've got a well-designed estate. You know, there was always going to be people, because me like Jonathan sat through every day of those inspections on the county plan. I've got the scars on my back to prove it if anyone wants to have a look. There were quite long days, they were quite heavy in terms of some of the detail. And there were always going to be people who objected to this at the very beginning as a proposal of greenbelt deletion, who are never going to be happy with it. So my view is, Chair, that we need to just get on and allow the developers to get on and deliver the housing that's needed to take the county forward. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Carl. Have any other committee members want to speak? No, well, I've got a mover and a seconder for approval, which is the officer's recommendation. All those in favour of approval? All those against? Any abstentions? Well, that's approved. Thank you. And that concludes today's business. Thank you very much for your attendance.